I'm not the kind of guy who thinks the whole office is out to get him. I grew up around people who just put their heads down and worked, and for most of my career, that's exactly what I did. But a year ago, I watched one coworker turn an entire team against me so quietly that by the time I noticed, I was already the problem. Everyone needed to manage, and the only reason I'm still here is because I kept receipts. When I joined that company, I was just a mid level project analyst in a software team of about 20 people. Mid sized SaaS, nothing glamorous. We built tools for logistics companies, dashboards, integrations, the kind of stuff you only notice when it breaks. I wasn't the star, I was the reliable spreadsheet guy. My calendar was always full, my tickets were always updated, and if you gave me a mess of requirements and half baked ideas, I could turn it into a clean plan that engineering actually understood. That's probably why I liked Mason at first. Mason walked into our team like he'd been scripted by HR. Tall, loud, perfect hair. The kind of laugh that filled the room and made managers look up from their laptops. Officially, he was a project lead. Unofficially, he was the guy everyone gravitated toward as soon as he made a joke in the kitchen. The first week he was there, he sat next to my desk, spun his chair around us, and said, "Ethan, right? You're the one who actually knows what's going on around here." I remember laughing and shrugging it off, but it felt nice. Someone finally noticed that I was the one holding half the project plans, together with duct tape and comments in Jira. The first weird thing happened about a month later. We were on a status call with a big client, Faulkner Freight. I'd spent 3 late nights cleaning up their integration timeline, mapping dependencies, and putting together a simple risk matrix. Nothing fancy, just clear. I shared the draft with Mason in Slack before the call. "Looks solid, man," he wrote back. "I'll walk them through it. You chime in if they have technical questions." On the call, he opened his deck, my structure, my wording, even my little color coding system. The only thing missing were my initials on the file name. "Nice work, Mason," our manager Lauren said afterward. "That's exactly the level of clarity we need with Faulkner." He flashed me a grin over the top of his monitor. "Couldn't have done it without Ethan's groundwork," he said lightly. Everyone laughed like it was a humble joke. I told myself it didn't matter whose name they said out loud, as long as the project stayed on track. Credit is messy. It happens. Then the jokes started. It was little things at first. "Ask Ethan," Mason would say when someone had a question about a report. "He's basically our human Excel plug-in." Or in stand-up. "Mason, did we finalize the scope with Faulkner?" "Yeah. Ethan did his magic spreadsheet thing again." People laughed. I smiled along, because what else do you do? It didn't feel malicious. Just office culture. You either roll with it, or you become the sensitive one. But slowly, my role got rewritten in everyone's head. I wasn't the guy who coordinated the moving parts. I was the quiet nerd behind Mason's big presentations. The first time I realized something was off was a Tuesday morning. I opened our project board and saw 3 tasks assigned to me with due dates that had already passed. All tagged, high priority, blocker. I hadn't even seen them before. When I opened the history, I saw the same pattern on all 3, created by Mason, assigned to himself, then reassigned to me late the previous evening after I'd logged off. No comment, no ping, nothing. At 9:12 a.m., Lauren pinged me. "Ethan, what's happening with these?" "Faulkner is asking." I swallowed and typed back, "First I'm hearing of them. Just saw the reassignment. I'll pick them up now." "Let's talk after stand-up," she replied. In stand-up, Mason shrugged. "Yeah, I probably should have called it out yesterday. I assumed Ethan saw the updates. That's on me," he said, sounding apologetic. "He's usually on top of things." Lauren nodded. Let's just make sure we're not missing critical tasks in the future." No one asked why I was apparently the only one who hadn't seen them. No one asked why they'd been due before I even knew I owned them. I left the call with a small knot in my stomach that didn't go away for the rest of the day. After that, little things piled up. I'd walk into a meeting room I'd been invited to. only to realize the real discussion with the client's decision makers had already happened in a smaller huddle I wasn't included in. Slack channels would appear in screenshots that I wasn't a member of. I'd find out about scope changes because a developer casually mentioned them, not because anyone looped me in on the official thread. When I brought it up gently, "Hey, next time, can you add me to those calls? It affects my timelines." I'd get the same response. "Oh, right, sorry, man. We just spun it up quickly. No big deal. We'll loop you next time." Next time never came. What did come were more miscommunications. An email to the client that mentioned a deadline I hadn't agreed to. A timesheet entry under my name for work I hadn't logged, corrected later when I pointed it out. A comment from a dev. "Mason said you wanted to push this to next sprint. Is that still true?" I hadn't said that. I did what most conflict-avoidant people do. I tried to be clearer. I wrote longer messages. I copied more people on emails. I documented decisions in the tickets themselves. I thought if I just communicated better, the confusion would stop. It didn't. The turning point for me wasn't some dramatic blow-up. It was an informal feedback chat on a Thursday afternoon. Lauren put a 10-minute slot on my calendar. "Just want to check in on how things are going," she said over Zoom, smiling the way managers smile when they're about to say something they don't want to own. "I'm hearing," she continued, "that some people feel you're a bit rigid, hard to collaborate with, maybe too attached to your process." I sat there stunned. "Who's some people?" I asked. She paused. "Look, I don't want this to feel like a witch hunt. It's just general feedback. The team really values flexibility, and sometimes it seems like you push back on changes a lot." I stared at the little green light on my webcam, imagining a room where everyone had calmly agreed that I was the difficult one. "I push back when the changes aren't reflected in the actual plan," I said slowly. "When deadlines move but nothing is updated, that's when things break. I'm trying to prevent that." "I get that," she said, "but perception matters too. Maybe try to be more solution-oriented." When the call ended, I just sat there with my hands flat on the desk. I knew how this game went. Once the phrase perception got involved, reality stopped mattering. That night, instead of opening Netflix, I opened our project board from home. I went through 3 months of history on the Faulkner project, line by line. Tickets created, reassigned, closed, comments added, descriptions edited. I exported the activity log into a CSV and started filtering. Patterns emerged. Tasks originally assigned to Mason would sit in his queue until a few days before the deadline, then jump to my name with no comment. Deadlines would be shifted in the ticket without the corresponding change in the client-facing timeline. Hours logged to one task would be quietly reduced and reappeared under his work in another. Most of it looked like garden variety sloppiness if you glance quickly, but when you put it all side by side, it wasn't sloppy. It was directional. Then I compared it to the status report Mason had sent Faulkner the previous Friday, the one he'd CC'd me on, but I hadn't read closely because I trusted him to follow the shared plan. The numbers didn't match. He'd understated the hours spent on a particular integration by almost 30% and claimed we were ahead of schedule on 2 work streams that were clearly behind in the system. I checked the billing draft in our internal tool. It matched his version, not the actual effort. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an auditor. But even I knew that if a client ever cross-checked those numbers, we were going to have a problem that went way beyond my communication style. I sat back in my chair, staring at the timestamp on Mason's last edit to the report. The discrepancy between what he was telling the client and what lived in the logs. Until that night, I had thought he was just playing office politics better than me. I didn't know yet it was the first breadcrumb in a trail that would end with auditors in our conference room. But that was just the beginning. When Mason realized I'd quietly pushed back during that Faulkner call, something in him shifted. He'd confront me. He didn't act angry. He just recalibrated, like he'd updated whatever private playbook he'd been using on me, and the next few weeks were hell in slow motion. It started with Lauren forwarding me a clarification request from Faulkner. They wanted an updated timeline because, according to them, some of our internal notes didn't match what Mason had promised. I reread the email 3 times. I hadn't even been on the call where he'd made those promises. When I asked him for context, he smiled, the way people do when they pretend something is funny. "Oh man, don't worry about it. Just clean up the dock for them, yeah? I told them you'd handle it. You're the detail guy." Detail guy. Every time he said it, the team laughed, because to them it meant thorough. To me it had started to mean dumping ground. But again, I did the job. I rebuilt the timeline from scratch, aligned the tasks with engineering, synced with QA, adjusted dependency chains. It took half a weekend. On Monday, I sent the polished timeline to Mason and Lauren. 10 minutes later, the VP of Product replied all. "This is clean work, Mason. Exactly what we needed." Mason hit reply with a winking emoji and a thanks. I stared at my screen long enough for the brightness to blur. I didn't reply. I didn't correct him. I just saved a local copy of the thread. Things escalated from there. Mason created a new Slack channel for quick turn coordination with the Faulkner integration engineers. Everyone was in it, except me. I found out only because a dev asked, "Did you see Mason's note about pushing release 3 to next Thursday?" I hadn't, because I hadn't been invited. I opened Slack, typed, I Mason. Could you add me?" and erased it. If I pushed, I looked insecure. If I didn't push, I kept missing information. It was a perfect trap, and the worst part was I could tell some teammates were starting to believe the narrative that I was the one who wasn't keeping up. Then came the blow I didn't expect. One morning, Lauren sent me a calendar invite titled Performance Alignment 1-1. No agenda, no notes. She opened the call with a soft smile. "Ethan, we need to talk about collaboration. I'm getting feedback that you're resistant to changes and that your attitude is impacting team morale." I felt my pulse in my throat. "Who said that?" She shook her head. "It's not about who. It's about the trend." Trend. That word hit harder than anything Mason had done. A trend meant many voices. A trend meant people had been quietly complaining, or someone had been quietly feeding those complaints. "I need you to be more flexible," she continued. "More supportive of Mason's leadership style." That sentence told me everything. Mason wasn't just turning the team. He'd turned her. I didn't argue. There was nothing to argue. The moment someone frames your behavior as a trend, logic loses. I ended the call, closed my laptop, and just sat there, breathing through anger I hadn't let myself feel before. That night, I didn't open the project board. I opened my OneNote journal, the thing I used to track tickets and dependencies, and I created a new section, Patterns. I listed every mismatch I'd found, tasks reassigned without notification, timesheet adjustments with no explanation, changes to client timelines not reflected in Jira, Slack channels created without including me, hours removed from my work and added to his, status reports containing optimistic data that didn't match logs. I added screenshots, timestamps, chat excerpts, not emotional notes, not Mason is screwing me, just facts. Plain, boring, corporate-friendly facts. By the end of the week, I had 27 entries, and strangely, that made the situation less painful. Facts don't gaslight you. Patterns don't care about popularity contests. Still, I wasn't ready to escalate. Not yet. I wanted one more confirmation that I wasn't imagining things. It came sooner than I expected. During a Thursday client sync, Faulkner's project manager asked a harmless question. "Could you walk us through the dependencies for Workstream B, specifically the QA window?" Mason jumped in. "Yeah, Ethan suggested we compress QA to 2 days. He's confident we can finish testing faster." I froze. I had never said that. In fact, I'd told Mason the opposite. QA needed 3 full days because of the custom validation logic. I unmuted slowly. Just to clarify, I didn't recommend a 2-day QA window. The test suite is too large for that. Our previous scope agreed on 3. There was a pause on the call, a long one. The Faulkner PM said, "That matches our understanding." Mason laughed lightly. "Ah, my mistake then. Miscommunication on my part." But his voice wasn't casual anymore. After the call, Lauren sent a message. "Let's regroup after lunch." When we joined the private Zoom room, Mason was already there, arms crossed. "I feel like Ethan keeps undermining me on client calls," he said before Lauren even greeted me. "I corrected a factual mistake," I said. "Yeah, but you make me look unprepared," he shot back. Lauren sighed. "We need better unity. Mason, double-check with Ethan before presenting timelines. Ethan, don't surprise Mason on calls." I felt my jaw tighten. I didn't surprise him. The logs. She raised a hand. "Let's just try to move forward." Move forward. Corporate 4. Don't push this. I ended the call shaking, not with fear, with clarity. Because there was one thing Lauren didn't know I'd noticed. When Mason switched QA from 3 days to 2, he also updated the billing sheet. 2 days meant fewer hours charged to Faulkner. Fewer hours meant we hit the efficiency target that triggered a performance bonus. For him, the reporting discrepancy wasn't harmless. It wasn't sloppy. It was beneficial, specifically to Mason. 3 nights later, I was reviewing logs again, mapping discrepancies, when I noticed something new, a sequence of time-stamped edits in the billing tool, all under Mason's account, adjusting hours downward on tasks he'd been assigned, and upward on tasks he'd later moved to juniors. Not enough to scream fraud, but enough to shift credit and performance metrics, enough to be a problem. And something in me settled. I realized I'd been trying to save a team that didn't want to be saved, trying to play fair in a system where he wrote the rules. That night, I stopped being the hero. At the top of my OneNote page, I typed a single sentence. "If the manager won't fix it, the company will." And beneath it, I opened the internal compliance portal. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would cost them everything. Submitting a compliance report in our company wasn't dramatic. No flashing lights. No, "Your message has been received by the Office of Internal Affairs." Just a quiet form, a secure upload field, and a confirmation email that looked like a parking receipt. But 2 things happened immediately. First, the system locked my submission so that only the internal audit team could see it. Second, I slept better than I had in months. The following Tuesday, something subtle changed. People walked past my desk quicker. Slack messages felt shorter, more careful. Mason avoided eye contact all morning and then overcorrected with a cheerful, "What's up, man?" That didn't match the tension in his shoulders. He knew something was off. He just didn't know what. By midday, a new name appeared on my calendar. Cynthia Hall, Internal Audit. The invite was for a process review conversation. 30 minutes, no agenda. Mandatory attendance. Most employees never meet internal audit unless they've already screwed up. I'd never spoken to Cynthia, but I knew her by reputation. Direct, methodical, allergic to excuses. At exactly 2 p.m., she joined the Zoom call. "Ethan," she said, "thank you for meeting with me." Her tone wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile. Just neutral, professionally empty. "I want to understand your team's workflow," she continued, "specifically around reporting, billing, and milestone approvals for Faulkner and related projects." I nodded, happy to walk you through anything. She didn't ask about Mason. She didn't ask about me. She asked about facts. Who edits the billing sheets? How are tasks reassigned? What's the approval process for timeline updates? Do you document verbal agreements anywhere? Who owns the client-facing numbers? I answered everything. Calmly, precisely, without speculation. When I finished, she asked, "Do you have any examples of discrepancies between internal logs and client reports?" "Yes," I said, "I do." I shared my screen, not with emotion, not with commentary, just opening files. The logs, the exports, the screenshots, the side-by-side comparisons. She didn't react, didn't raise an eyebrow, didn't ask, "Who did this?" Instead, she said, "Please upload all of this to the folder I'm sharing." Her phrasing told me one crucial thing. She wasn't verifying whether there was a problem. She was collecting proof for a problem she already believed existed. 3 days later, the chaos began. It started with small noises. A junior dev whispering in the hallway. Someone saying, "Are we being audited?" near the kitchen. Nobody had official confirmation, but the sudden burst of calendar invites gave it away. Different people on the team got meetings titled Process Clarification Required, Workstream Review, Billing Accuracy Interview, all from internal audit. Mason got 3 in one day. He tried to play it cool, advising people that these reviews happen all the time. But the way he repeatedly checked his email, mid-conversation, said otherwise. The tension got thicker every hour. On Thursday, Lauren called an emergency team meeting. "I want to reassure everyone," she said, voice tight, "that we're cooperating fully with the review. This is routine. No one should be worried." The lie was so transparent, it made the room quieter. After the meeting, Mason pulled me aside. "What's going on?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "What do you mean?" He scanned my face like he was trying to read a tell. "Come on, Ethan. This sudden audit? This timing? Someone stirred something." I didn't react. "If there's nothing wrong, you'll be fine." He forced a smile. "You think this is about me?" I didn't answer, and he didn't let the silence sit. "You know," he said, leaning closer, "if someone reported something, they'd better hope they're clean. Audit doesn't play favorites." He walked away, but the threat was obvious. Not violent, not wild. Just the kind of threat someone uses when they believe they still run the room. He didn't, because on Monday morning the first real fracture appeared. During a cross-department sync, one of the analysts from finance, a quiet guy named Derek, spoke up when Mason presented the latest Faulkner dashboard. "These numbers don't match what we have in our records," Derek said. "Specifically the QA cycle hours and efficiency rate." Mason blinked. "Huh? That's strange. Maybe Ethan—" Cynthia stepped into the doorway. She hadn't been invited to the meeting. No one even noticed her standing there until she spoke. "Please don't guess," she said. "We have the logs." The room froze. She stepped forward, placed a thin folder on the table, and added, "We'll need additional interviews today. I'll send calendar invites." Then she left without another word. I watched Mason's face drain a color. He wasn't panicking yet, but he was doing the next closest thing, calculating. That afternoon, someone from HR sat outside the conference room where Audit had set up. That only happens in 2 cases: terminations or investigations that are about to get messy. One by one, people went in. One by one, they came out quieter. By Thursday, the team had split itself into 3 camps. People who avoided eye contact with Mason, people who suddenly became extremely friendly toward me, and people who whispered in corners, terrified they'd signed off on numbers they hadn't understood. It didn't take long for the truth to snowball. A junior dev admitted Mason asked him to massage a task estimate. A QA lead revealed Mason had adjusted her logged hours directly in the tool. A project coordinator shared screenshots of a scope change Mason claimed was approved verbally, but never documented. No one was trying to frame him. They were all trying to save themselves. Then came the moment everything changed. We were in a scheduled team sync, tense and formal. Mason was screen sharing a timeline update when Cynthia and a second auditor, Mark, entered the room. "Pause," Cynthia said. "We need to address a discrepancy." Mason kept his cool. "Sure, what's the issue?" Mark placed a printed log on the table. "These edits were made from your account," he said. "Multiple downward adjustments on your assigned hours and upward adjustments on tasks later reassigned to others. Can you explain the rationale?" I'd expected Mason to deny, laugh, deflect. He didn't. His voice cracked just slightly. "This must be a mistake. The tool glitches sometimes. Ethan can confirm, but I didn't nod. I didn't shake my head. I just sat still, because the logs were precise. They showed timestamps, IP addresses, user authentication. They didn't lie. The room felt like it was shrinking. Even Lauren looked shaken. Cynthia didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She simply said, "The data contradicts your explanation. We'll continue this in a formal session." And for the first time since I'd joined the company, Mason didn't have a joke or a grin or a comeback. He just closed his laptop. The meeting ended early. People filed out in silence, heads down like they'd witnessed something private and dangerous. As I walked back to my desk, I heard someone whisper, "He's done." I didn't turn around. I didn't smile. I wasn't happy. Not yet. But for the first time in months, I felt the ground under my feet again. Solid, real, mine. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. And now the truth was louder than he was. And then silence. The kind that means something's gone wrong. The day after Cynthia confronted Mason with the logs, our department felt like a set after the cameras stopped rolling. Everyone moved slower, spoke softer, avoided eye contact. Even Slack was quiet. No memes, no casual jokes, no morning team, messages from Mason. By lunchtime, no one had seen him. At 2:15 p.m., a message popped up in the team channel. "Please join the all-hands meeting in conference room B at 2:30. No emojis, no explanation. That was all the confirmation any of us needed. Conference room B was the only one big enough to pull a whole department together. It was also the room HR used when something had to be said out loud, with witnesses and minutes recorded. When I walked in, Lauren was already at the front of the room, standing next to someone from HR and someone from legal. Her hands were clasped, knuckles white. The meeting started on time. "I want to thank everyone for their cooperation this past week," Lauren said, her voice thin but calm. "Internal Audit has completed its review of the Faulkner workflow and associated reporting processes. Effective today, we'll be implementing a number of corrective measures." She didn't say Mason's name. She didn't need to. HR stepped forward. "We want to remind everyone of the importance of adhering to proper reporting procedures. Any deviation puts the company at financial and contractual risk. As of this morning, one employee has been terminated for cause following confirmed violations of these procedures." No gasps, no whispers, just a heavy collective exhale. Lauren continued. "Additionally, we're restructuring responsibilities to ensure more transparency and accuracy moving forward." That was the gentle way of saying the next part. "Going forward, I'll be transitioning out of the Faulkner account," she added, and shifting into a strategic role, focused on onboarding and internal training. Translation: she'd been removed from leadership without calling it a demotion. The room absorbed it in stunned silence. Then the meeting ended, abruptly, cleanly, with no space for questions. People filed out, some shaken, some relieved, some clearly reevaluating their own choices over the past year. I stayed behind a moment longer. The legal rep unplugged a laptop. HR gathered notes. Lauren avoided my eyes, not out of guilt, I think, but out of exhaustion. When I finally walked out, the corridor felt different. Lighter, not happy, not celebratory, just honest, for the first time in a long time. By the next morning, Mason's desk was empty. His personal items were gone except for a forgotten charging cable coiled on the floor. IT had already disabled his accounts. His name vanished from the Slack directory. That was it. Months of manipulation, subtle digs, quiet sabotage, erased in a digital instant. People started approaching me carefully. A junior dev. "Hey, I didn't know the full picture. Sorry if I ever came off weird." A project coordinator. "If you need help with anything this week, seriously, just ask." A QA lead. "I should have spoken up sooner." They weren't groveling. They weren't performing guilt. They were doing what decent people do when a bad system collapses, and they finally see their part in it. I didn't hold grudges. I also didn't pretend we were suddenly best friends. Some things don't go back to the way they were, and they shouldn't. Around noon, I got an unexpected calendar invite. Director of Operations. Intro meeting. If it had come 3 months earlier, I would have assumed it was a mistake. Now? I had a guess. The director, a woman named Olivia, joined the call with her camera on. "Ethan," she said, "I've been reviewing the audit outcomes and some of the documentation you provided. You have a strong grasp of cross-functional processes. Have you considered working in operations or compliance instead of a project coordination?" "I haven't," I said truthfully. "Not until recently." She nodded. "You're detail-oriented. You communicate clearly, and you don't panic under pressure. That's rare. I'm opening a role to rebuild some of the processes that clearly need tightening. It would be a promotion and a transfer, reporting directly to me." It took me a moment to process the shift. 3 months ago, I was being told I was too rigid, too difficult, too process-bound. Now those same traits were a qualification. "What happened with your team wasn't your fault," she added, not as comfort, but as assessment. "You were trying to uphold the process in a place where the process wasn't being followed." I exhaled slowly. "What would the role involve?" I asked. Olivia outlined it. Rebuilding parts of the reporting pipeline, creating guardrails so hours, timelines, and approvals couldn't be manipulated, training junior staff on documentation discipline, serving as a liaison between ops, audit, and product. Not glamorous, not political, not dependent on who laughs at whose jokes. It felt clean. "I'd like to offer you the position," she said. "Think about it over the weekend." I didn't need the weekend. "I accept." Her smile was brief, but sincere. "Good. You start next month. HR will handle the transition." After the call, I walked back to my desk, opened a blank document, and began listing everything I needed to hand off before leaving the team. I wasn't leaving a mess. Even after everything, I wouldn't be the guy who slipped out quietly with loose threads dangling. Over the next weeks, the department found a new rhythm. Lauren left the Faulkner account and quietly took a training role. She wasn't incompetent, just overwhelmed and overly trusting of the wrong voice. She avoided me at first, then one afternoon caught me near the elevator. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have seen it sooner." I nodded gently. We all should have. She exhaled, maybe relieved she wasn't being punished twice. The rest of the team rebuilt itself, slowly, carefully, without Mason's gravity pulling everything into his orbit. On my last day in that department, I packed up my few office belongings, a notebook, headphones, a half-dead plant I'd forgotten to water. A few coworkers stopped by to wish me luck, some awkwardly, some warmly. As I walked out, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindictive. I didn't feel like I'd won. I just felt done. Done trying to earn validation from people who only respect noise. Done trying to fix a team that wasn't mine to fix. Done playing by rules someone else rewrote in pencil. My new department was quieter, more structured, less political. The kind of place where process wasn't an afterthought. It was the backbone. On my first day there, Olivia introduced me to a small group of analysts. "This is Ethan," she said. "He's here because he understands the difference between cooperation and compliance, and why both matter." For the first time in a long time, I felt understood before I even proved myself. Weeks later, when I walked past the old office to return a laptop charger, I noticed something small but oddly meaningful. The team had reorganized their shared drive. The folder Mason used to control, the one he'd locked down with limited visibility, was now fully open. Every file neatly labeled, every log automatically versioned. Transparency in its purest form. A quiet, invisible monument to what had happened. And why it mattered. I didn't destroy Mason. I didn't avenge myself. I simply stopped letting someone else write the story for me. And when the truth finally landed, it did what truth always does. It didn't just clear my name. It cleaned the room.